The African sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless sky above Ouagadougou, casting its relentless heat upon the capital city of Burkina Faso. It was the kind of afternoon where even the shadows offered no relief, where the air shimmered with waves of heat rising from the cracked, dusty earth. In the affluent neighborhoods, air conditioners hummed behind fortified walls. In the poor quarters, families sought whatever shade they could find beneath corrugated metal roofs that turned their homes into ovens. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat in the back of his armored vehicle, reviewing documents for the upcoming ministerial meeting. At just 35 years old, he had become one of Africa's youngest heads of state, rising to power not through dynasty or corruption, but through a genuine revolution of conscience. The papers in his hands detailed economic projections, foreign investment proposals, and diplomatic negotiations, the typical concerns of governance that filled his days from dawn until well past midnight. But Ibrahim was not a typical leader. Those who knew him understood that behind the military uniform and the weight of presidential responsibility beat the heart of a man who had never forgotten where he came from. He had grown up in modest circumstances, not in poverty like so many of his countrymen, but close enough to witness it, to understand it, to feel its presence like a shadow over his childhood. His chief of staff, Major Sankara, sat across from him, scrolling through messages on a secure tablet. "Sir, the French ambassador is being particularly insistent about this afternoon's meeting. He's called 3 times in the past hour." Ibrahim glanced up, his dark eyes thoughtful. "The French are always insistent, Major. They've been insistent for over a century. They can wait another hour." A slight smile crossed Sankara's face. He had served with Ibrahim since their days in the military academy, had witnessed his friend's transformation from idealistic young officer to revolutionary leader. "The ministers won't be pleased about the delay either." "Ministers are paid to be patient," Ibrahim replied, returning his attention to the documents. But something outside the tinted window caught his eye, a flicker of movement that seemed out of place even in the chaotic tapestry of Ouagadougou's streets. The convoy had turned into one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, taking a shortcut to avoid traffic congestion on the main roads. This was not an area that typically saw government motorcades. Here, the streets narrowed into unpaved paths, lined with makeshift structures built from whatever materials people could salvage: rusted metal sheets, weathered wooden planks, faded plastic tarps. Children in tattered clothes played in the dust, their laughter a defiant spark of joy in the face of grinding poverty. And then Ibrahim saw him. Among the playing children, one stood apart. A small boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, moved slowly along the edge of the road, bent under a burden that seemed impossible for his size. On his head and in his arms, he carried a stack of red clay bricks, the kind used in construction throughout West Africa. The child's thin arms trembled with the effort. His legs, no thicker than bamboo stalks, shuffled forward in small, painful steps. Ibrahim leaned forward, his documents forgotten. "Slow down," he instructed his driver quietly. The convoy reduced speed, and as they drew closer, Ibrahim could see more details that made his chest tighten. The boy's clothes were little more than rags, stained red from brick dust and dark with sweat. His bare feet were cracked and bleeding, leaving faint marks in the dirt. But what struck Ibrahim most profoundly was the child's face, aged beyond its years, lined with a weariness that no child should ever know, eyes fixed on the ground ahead with grim determination. "Sir, we're already 15 minutes behind schedule," Major Sankara noted, though his own eyes had followed Ibrahim's gaze to the struggling child. For a long moment, Ibrahim didn't respond. He watched as the boy stumbled slightly, nearly losing his balance, the brick swaying dangerously. The child caught himself, adjusted the load, and continued forward. In that moment, Ibrahim saw not just one suffering child, but the face of his nation's deepest wounds: poverty, inequality, the exploitation of the innocent, the systematic failure to protect the most vulnerable. Around the boy, life continued. Other people passed by without stopping, some glancing at the child with sympathy, others with indifference. It was a common sight in neighborhoods like this one, so common that it had become invisible. That's what poverty does. It doesn't just hurt, it numbs those who witness it until suffering becomes background noise, unremarkable and unaddressed. "Stop the car," Ibrahim said suddenly, his voice cutting through the air-conditioned silence of the vehicle. Major Sankara turned, surprise evident on his face. "Sir?" "I said stop the car, now." The driver's foot touched the brake and the convoy came to a halt, raising a small cloud of reddish dust that hung in the still air. In the security vehicle behind them, agents immediately went on high alert. This was not part of the plan. The neighborhood had not been secured. The stop had not been scheduled or approved by the protective detail. The chief of security, Colonel Bambara, was on the radio within seconds. "Alpha Leader has stopped unexpectedly. Secure the perimeter. Be advised, we are in an unsecured location." But Ibrahim wasn't listening to the tactical chatter. He was opening his door, stepping out into the scorching heat before anyone could stop him. The temperature hit him like a physical force, at least 40 degrees Celsius, maybe more. Within seconds, sweat began to form on his brow, but he barely noticed. The small boy with the bricks had stopped walking, frozen in place by the sight of the presidential convoy. Fear flickered across his young face. In neighborhoods like this, official vehicles often meant trouble, police raids, evictions, harassment. The child's arms trembled more violently now, whether from exhaustion or fear. It was impossible to tell. Ibrahim removed his military cap, a gesture of respect, of humility. His security team scrambled to form a protective circle, weapons ready, eyes scanning windows and rooftops. But Ibrahim walked forward slowly, non-threateningly, until he stood before the child. Up close, the situation was even worse than he'd thought. The boy couldn't have weighed more than 25 kilograms, but the stack of bricks he carried must have weighed nearly that much. His shoulders were bent at an unnatural angle. His breathing came in short, painful gasps. Welts and calluses covered his small hands. A recent cut on his foot oozed blood mixed with dirt. Ibrahim knelt down on one knee in the dusty street, bringing himself to the child's eye level. Around them, people began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the unusual sight. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. "That's the president. What's he doing here? Is someone in trouble?" "Little brother," Ibrahim said softly, his voice gentle despite the authority it usually carried. "What is your name?" The boy's lips moved, but no sound emerged. His eyes, wide with fear and confusion, darted between Ibrahim and the armed security personnel surrounding them. The bricks in his arms seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. "It's okay," Ibrahim continued, keeping his voice steady and warm. "You're not in trouble. I'm not here to hurt you or take anything from you. I just want to know your name. Can you tell me?" The child swallowed hard. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from exhaustion and dehydration. "Amadou, sir. My name is Amadou." "Amadou," Ibrahim repeated, letting the name settle between them like a prayer. In that moment, this child was not a statistic, not a symbol, not a political talking point. He was Amadou, a specific human being with a specific life, specific dreams, and specific suffering. "Amadou, those bricks you're carrying, they're very heavy, aren't they?" The boy nodded, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Where are you taking them?" "To the construction site, sir. Near the Central Market. I carry bricks all day. 20 trips, sometimes 25 if the contractor needs more." Ibrahim felt something break inside his chest. 20 trips. 25 trips. This child, who should have been in a classroom learning to read, who should have been playing football with friends, who should have been worried about nothing more serious than homework and scraped knees, was making 20 trips per day carrying bricks that weighed nearly as much as his entire body. "Why?" Ibrahim asked, though he could already feel the weight of the answer pressing down on him like those very bricks. "Why must you carry bricks, Amadou?" The boy's tears spilled over then, running down his dust-covered cheeks and leaving clean tracks through the grime. His small chest heaved with sobs that he tried desperately to hold back, as if crying in front of the president was somehow forbidden, somehow shameful. "My father died, sir, 3 months ago, in the gold mine near Kaya. There was a collapse. They never found his body." Amadou's voice broke, but he pushed forward, as if confessing these truths to someone who might actually listen was a relief too powerful to contain. My mother is very sick. She cannot work. She coughs blood sometimes. My little sister, Aisha, she is only 4 years old, and she is hungry all the time. The contractor, he pays me 500 francs for each trip. If I don't work, we don't eat. That's just how it is, sir. 500 francs. Less than $1. This child was destroying his body, sacrificing his childhood, carrying crushing weight under a merciless sun for less than $1 per trip. To earn enough to keep his family from starving, to buy a small bag of millet or rice, to afford charcoal for cooking, he needed to make 20 of these trips, carrying perhaps 30 kilograms of bricks each time. Ibrahim placed his hand gently on Amadu's shoulder, feeling the sharp ridge of the boy's shoulder blade through his torn shirt. Around them, the crowd had grown larger. 50 people, then 100, emerged from their homes and workplaces. Drawn by the extraordinary sight of their president stopped in their forgotten neighborhood. Some whispered excitedly, hope flickering in their eyes. Others watched with deep suspicion, their faces hardened by years of broken promises from politicians who came, took photos, made speeches, and disappeared back into their air-conditioned offices, never to be seen again. Major Sankara approached, his phone in hand. "Sir, the ministers are calling. The French ambassador is demanding to know why we're delayed." "We really should—" "Major," Ibrahim interrupted, not taking his eyes off Amadu. "Tell the ministers I will arrive when I arrive. Tell the French ambassador that Burkina Faso is a sovereign nation, and he does not demand anything from us. And put the phone away. Right now, this child is more important than all of them." Sankara hesitated for only a moment before nodding and stepping back. He had known Ibrahim long enough to recognize when his friend had reached a point of absolute conviction. When nothing could sway him from a chosen course, Ibrahim turned his full attention back to Amadu. "Amadu, I need you to do something for me. I need you to show me where you live. I need to meet your mother and your sister. Will you do that?" The boy nodded slowly, confusion and hope warring across his young face. "Yes, sir, but our home, it's not— We have nothing nice. It's not suitable for someone like you." "Amadu," Ibrahim said firmly but kindly, "you let me worry about what's suitable. Just show me the way." What happened next became legendary in Burkina Faso, a moment captured by dozens of cell phone cameras and shared across social media platforms within minutes. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, reached out and took the stack of bricks from Amadu's trembling arms. The crowd gasped. Even the security personnel looked shocked. Presidents don't carry bricks. Presidents don't do manual labor in the streets. Presidents maintain distance, preserve dignity, operate through intermediaries and aides. But Ibrahim wasn't trying to be a typical president. The bricks were rough and heavy in his hands, their edges sharp and uneven. Within seconds, Ibrahim felt the weight pressing down on his arms and shoulders. Within a minute, his muscles began to ache. He was a trained soldier, physically fit and strong. Yet this burden was considerable even for him. And Amadu had been carrying this weight 20 times a day, every day for months. "Lead the way," Ibrahim said to the boy, adjusting his grip on the bricks. They began to walk. And it was not a long distance in meters, perhaps 300 meters through narrow, unpaved paths between makeshift houses and rusted metal shacks. But every step revealed a deeper layer of poverty that most government officials never witnessed, never had to confront directly. Children with distended bellies watched from doorways. Women washing clothes in dirty water looked up with surprise. Old men sitting in whatever shade they could find nudged each other and pointed. "Is that really the president? What is he doing here? Why is he carrying bricks?" Ibrahim's security detail followed in a state of barely controlled panic. Colonel Bambra spoke urgently into his radio, calling for backup units. His eyes constantly scanned the rooftops, the windows, the gathering crowd. Every security protocol was being violated. The president was on foot in an unsecured area, surrounded by unvetted civilians, following an unknown route to an unknown destination. But Ibrahim seemed to exist in his own world, focused entirely on the small boy who walked ahead, occasionally looking back as if to confirm that this powerful man was still there, that this wasn't some fever dream brought on by heat and exhaustion. Sir, Major Sankara attempted again, walking quickly to keep pace. The ministers are waiting. There are calls coming in from the African Union office. The French ambassador has requested an urgent meeting about the mining contracts. Ibrahim stopped walking and turned to face his aide. His eyes, usually warm and reassuring, now blazed with an intensity that made the young man step back involuntarily. Listen to me very carefully. Major, Ibrahim said, his voice low but commanding, vibrating with barely contained emotion. Every phone call I ignore, every meeting I miss, they can all be rescheduled. Ministers can wait. Ambassadors can wait. The world can wait. But if I walk away from this child right now, if I return to my comfortable office and my air-conditioned meetings and forget what I've seen here today, then I am not fit to lead this nation. I become just another politician in a nice uniform, making speeches while children break their backs in the dirt. Do you understand what I'm saying? The aide nodded quickly, his own eyes glistening with unexpected emotion. Yes, sir. I understand. Good. Then no more interruptions. Not unless Ouagadougou is literally on fire. They continued walking. The crowd that followed grew larger with each passing minute. Word spread through the neighborhood with remarkable speed. The president is here. He's carrying bricks for a child. He's going to the poor quarter. Something is happening. An elderly woman, her face creased with the deep lines of a life lived hard, stepped forward from the crowd. She wore a faded traditional wrapper and a headscarf that had once been colorful, but was now bleached by sun and countless washings. Her eyes, though tired, held a fierce intelligence. "Mr. President," she called out, her voice cracking with a mixture of hope and bitterness. "My grandson. He carries water jerry cans, 25 kilograms each, from the well to the construction sites. 10 times a day, sometimes more in the hot season. He is 9 years old. His back is already curved like an old man's. Will you help him too? Will you help all of them? Or is this just for the cameras?" Her question hung in the air like an accusation, like a challenge. It was the question everyone in that crowd wanted to ask but didn't dare. Politicians came and went. Promises were made and broken. The poor had learned, through generation after generation of disappointment, not to believe, not to hope too much, because hope crushed hurts worse than no hope at all. Ibrahim stopped and turned to face the woman directly. He met her skeptical gaze with unflinching honesty. "What is your grandson's name?" The woman blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "Usman." "His name is Usman." "Usman," Ibrahim repeated, committing it to memory. "I will remember Usman." "I will remember all of them." A man's voice came from deeper in the crowd, harsh and challenging, roughened by years of manual labor and disappointment. "Politicians give us words. The French gave us words before they left. The ones who came before you gave us words. What we need is not more words. What we need is real change." The tension in the air thickened immediately. Ibrahim's security team moved closer, hands drifting instinctively toward their weapons. Colonel Bambra's jaw tightened, his radio already at his lips to call for crowd, but Ibrahim raised his hand sharply, stopping them. He approached the man who had spoken, a laborer in his 40s wearing clothes stained with cement and sweat, his hands calloused and scarred from years of construction work. Ibrahim walked right up to him, meeting his angry gaze directly, unflinchingly. "You are absolutely right," Ibrahim said simply, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent crowd. "Words mean nothing without action. Words are the cheapest currency in politics. So I'm not going to give you more promises. I'm not going to make a speech. I'm just going to ask you this. Watch me. Watch what I do next. Not today, not just this moment, but in the coming weeks and months. Hold me accountable. And if I fail, if I turn out to be just another politician who talks but doesn't act, then call me out. That is your right. That is your duty as citizens. Never stop demanding better from those who lead you." The crowd fell into stunned silence. Leaders didn't speak like this. Leaders didn't admit vulnerability or invite criticism. Leaders didn't engage directly with challenging questions from common citizens. They hid behind spokespeople and carefully scripted messages. But Ibrahim Traoré, they were beginning to realize, was not like other leaders. They continued walking, and finally, Amadou stopped in front of a structure that could barely be called a house. It was a patchwork creation of corrugated metal sheets salvaged from demolished buildings, old wooden planks that had warped in the rain and sun, and plastic tarps held together with rope and wire. The whole thing looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. Through gaps in the walls, Ibrahim could see inside, a single room, perhaps 3 meters by 4 meters, with a dirt floor and no windows. A thin shaft of sunlight pierced through a hole in the roof, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stifling air. "Mama!" Amadou called softly, his voice filled with apprehension as he stepped through the doorway, a simple gap in the metal walls covered by a piece of fabric. "Mama, please!" "The president is here!" From inside came a woman's voice, weak and panicked. "The president?" "No, Amadou, what have you done?" "We have nothing to offer. He cannot see us like this. We are not presentable. We are—" Ibrahim stepped through the entrance, ducking under the low opening. He had to let his eyes adjust to the dimness after the brilliant sunlight outside. The interior was even worse than he'd glimpsed from outside. The space was barely larger than a small bedroom, yet it housed an entire family. There was no running water, no electricity, no furniture beyond a few plastic containers and a thin sleeping mat on the ground. The air was thick and hot, stifling, carrying the smell of illness and unwashed bodies, not from lack of cleanliness, but from lack of water. The temperature inside must have been over 45 degrees Celsius. On the mat lay a woman who could have been anywhere from 30 to 50 years old. Poverty aged people prematurely, making such estimates impossible. Her name, Ibrahim would learn, was Fatih. She was probably in her early 30s, but looked decades older. Her body was frighteningly thin, her cheeks hollow, her eyes sunken and glazed with fever. Her breathing came in shallow, raspy gasps, punctuated by violent coughs that shook her frail frame. Beside her sat a little girl, Aisha, Amadou's sister. She was perhaps 4 years old, with enormous eyes and a thin face and a belly distended from malnutrition and parasites. She clutched a rag doll made from scraps of cloth, and she watched this stranger entering their home with wary silence. "Forgive me, sir," Fatih whispered, tears of shame rolling down her hollow cheeks as she tried desperately to sit up, to show some dignity before this important visitor. "Forgive our poverty. Forgive that we have nothing to offer you. Forgive—" Her words dissolved into a coughing fit so severe that she doubled over, her whole body convulsing. Blood flecked her lips. Ibrahim felt his throat tighten painfully. He knelt beside the mat, just as he had knelt beside Amadou in the street. Behind him, his security detail crowded in the doorway, their faces showing shock and discomfort. These were tough military men, but this level of poverty, this raw human suffering, shook even them. "Sister," Ibrahim said gently, his voice thick with emotion, "there is nothing to forgive. The shame is not yours. The shame belongs to a system that allows this to happen, that lets families fall through every crack until they land here. The shame belongs to those of us in power who have not done enough, who have failed our most basic duty to protect our people." Outside, the crowd pressed closer, dozens of people now, trying to see, trying to hear. Some climbed onto neighboring structures for a better view. Others held up cell phones, recording everything. The footage would go viral within hours, spreading across Burkina Faso and then across Africa and eventually across the world. Inside the shack, Major Sankara stood at the entrance, his phone buzzing incessantly with urgent messages. The ministers were growing impatient and angry. Ambassadors were demanding answers. The carefully planned schedule was in ruins. Important people were being kept waiting. But as Ibrahim looked into the eyes of Fatih, and then at Amadou standing in the corner with his hands clasped together as if in prayer, and then at little Aisha with her swollen belly and fearful eyes, he made a decision that would cost him political capital, that would bring criticism from bureaucrats and foreign governments, that would be called reckless and impulsive by those who valued procedure over people. He made a choice that shocked everyone, a choice that would prove that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do, the most radical thing, the most human thing. Ibrahim Traoré stood up inside that cramped, stifling shack, and for a long moment, he simply stood there, his jaw working, his hands clenched at his sides, his mind racing through implications and consequences and protocols. Everyone waited. The crowd outside held its collective breath. Amadou watched with confused hope. Fati tried again to sit up, to show dignity before this powerful man. Little Aisha clutched her rag doll tighter. Then Ibrahim turned to Colonel Bambra, his chief of security, and spoke words that nobody expected, words that violated every protocol in the Presidential Security Handbook. "Call the military hospital immediately. I want an ambulance here within 10 minutes. This woman needs emergency medical care right now. And call the presidential residence. Tell them to prepare rooms for this family. They're coming to stay until we resolve this situation properly." Colonel Bambara stared at his president, his mouth slightly open. "Sir, the presidential residence, but protocol, security clearances, the procedures for—" "I don't care about protocol," Ibrahim interrupted, his voice rising with an intensity born of righteous anger that had been building in him since the moment he first saw Amadou carrying those bricks. "I don't care about procedures or security clearances or bureaucratic nonsense. This woman is dying. These children are starving. We have the power to help them right now, this very moment today. If we have the power to help, and we choose to hide behind bureaucracy instead, if we choose procedures over human lives, then what kind of men are we? What kind of leader am I?" The passion in his voice silenced every objection. Even the crowd outside fell quiet, straining to hear. Ibrahim turned back to Fati, his voice softening again. "What is your name, sister?" "Fati," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My name is Fati, and I am so sorry." "No," Ibrahim cut her off gently but firmly. "No more apologies. Fati, I am taking you to the military hospital. The best doctors in Burkina Faso will see you. They will treat whatever illness you have. Your children will have food, proper shelter, safety. And Amadou—" He looked at the boy whose thin face was now streaming with tears. "You will never carry another brick. Do you hear me? Never again. You are going to go to school. You are going to learn. You are going to be a child, the way God intended." "But, sir," Fati protested weakly, her voice breaking, "we cannot pay. We have no money. The hospital. They will not treat us without—" "The hospital will treat you because I command it," Ibrahim said firmly, with all the authority of his office. "And the money is not your concern. The nation has money, plenty of it. What we have lacked is the will to use it for the people who actually need it, instead of wasting it on ceremonies and unnecessary expenses and the comfort of those who are already comfortable." He paused, looking around the miserable shack that this family called home. "How much is your rent for this place?" Fati's eyes filled with shame. 5,000 francs per month, sir. About $8. $8 per month for a metal shack with holes in the roof, no water, no electricity, no sanitation. And there was probably a landlord somewhere profiting from this family's desperation. Outside, someone in the crowd began to cry, a woman's sob that pierced the afternoon air. Then another person, and another. The sound rippled through the gathered people like a wave of released emotion. Some still doubted. "We'll see if he keeps his word," a voice muttered. But others were already believing, already hoping, already feeling something fundamental shift in the very air around them. Ibrahim stepped back outside, and his presence commanded immediate attention. The crowd fell silent. He stood there for a moment, looking at all these faces. Men, women, children, elderly people, all of them marked by poverty, all of them with stories probably just as heartbreaking as Fati's. "Listen to me," he called out, his voice carrying across the dusty space with natural authority. "What you see happening here today is not charity. This is not me being kind or generous. This is justice. This is what should have been happening all along. These are our children. This is our nation. Their suffering is our collective failure. My failure, our government's failure, society's failure." He paused, letting his words sink in. Around him, people nodded. Some wiped tears from their eyes. I came to power making promises of change. But I realize now that many of you have heard promises before. So let me be completely clear. I am not making another promise. I am making a commitment backed by action. Starting today, not next month, not next year, but today, we are launching an emergency program. No child in Burkina Faso will be forced to work in dangerous conditions. Every child will have access to education. Every family will have access to health care. Will it be easy? No. Will it happen overnight? No. Will there be obstacles and opposition from people who profit from the current system? Absolutely. But will we do it anyway? Yes, because that is what it means to lead. That is what it means to serve your people. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, their voices rising in a spontaneous celebration. Some wept openly, years of pent-up frustration and hope finally finding release. Others still watched, skeptically, their faces hard with the cynicism born of too many disappointments, waiting to see if these words would transform into action or evaporate like so many political speeches before them. But then the ambulance arrived, its siren wailing as it navigated the narrow paths. Medical personnel rushed into the shack with a stretcher, with medical equipment. With the urgency that should always accompany emergency care but too often didn't in poor neighborhoods. They emerged moments later carrying Fadi on the stretcher, an IV already in her arm, an oxygen mask over her face. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. Amadou and little Aisha climbed into the ambulance beside their mother, paramedics helping them up, treating them with dignity and care. Before the ambulance doors closed, Amadou looked back at Ibrahim one last time. And in that look was everything: gratitude, wonder, disbelief, and a silent question that needed no words. Is this real? Is this actually happening? Ibrahim nodded to him, making a silent promise. Yes, this is real. But Ibrahim wasn't finished. The ambulance pulling away was just the beginning. He turned to Major Sankara, his expression now all business, the full weight of presidential authority settling back onto his shoulders. I want every government ministry to conduct an immediate census of child labor in their sectors. I want comprehensive reports on my desk within 1 week, not superficial estimates, but real data. And I want a delegation to visit every neighborhood like this one in Ouagadougou. I want to know how many Amadous there are, how many Fatis, how many children are breaking their bodies just to survive. Sir, the cost of such an undertaking, Major Sankara began, his mind already calculating budgets and logistics. The cost of ignoring them is higher, Ibrahim cut him off sharply. We spend millions on defense, on administration, on fancy ceremonies and international conferences. We can redirect some of those resources to our children instead. Adjust the budget, cut the waste, eliminate the unnecessary expenses, find the money. That's an order, not a suggestion. The crowd watched as Ibrahim personally helped load some of Amadou's meager belongings into one of the security vehicles. A few pieces of clothing, the rag doll that Aisha clutched, a small pot that Fadi had used for cooking. He didn't delegate this task to an assistant or a soldier. He did it himself, his presidential uniform getting dusty, his hands touching the worn possessions of the poorest of the poor. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but symbols matter. Actions speak louder than any speech. And in that moment, watching their president kneel in the dirt to help a poor family, watching him treat these forgotten people with dignity and respect, something profound happened in the hearts of the watching people. Hope, that dangerous, beautiful, powerful thing that had been crushed so many times before, began to bloom again. As Ibrahim's convoy finally prepared to leave, the elderly grandmother who had challenged him earlier stepped forward again. She walked right up to him, and though he was surrounded by armed guards, though he was the president, she looked him straight in the eyes with the earned authority of age and suffering. "We will watch," she said simply. "We will remember this day. Don't let us down. Hold me accountable," Ibrahim replied, meeting her gaze with equal intensity. "I mean that. If I fail, if I forget, if I fall back into comfortable habits, then call me out, loudly, publicly. That is your right and your duty." As the convoy drove away, leaving behind a crowd of people whose entire world had just tilted on its axis, Ibrahim sat in silence in the back of his vehicle. His mind raced with implications and plans, and the monumental task he had just committed himself to. Major Sankara sat across from him, finally speaking after several minutes of silence. "Sir, that was extraordinary. But you know there will be consequences. The ministers will complain. The international community will question whether you're fit to govern if you keep stopping your schedule for individual cases. The business interests who profit from cheap child labor will push back hard. Ibrahim looked at his friend and aide, his expression serious. Then let them complain. Let them question. Let them push back. Major, when I took power, I didn't do it to be comfortable or to please foreign investors or to maintain the same broken system with a different face at the top. I did it because this nation deserves better. Our children deserve better. He looked out the window at the passing neighborhoods, seeing them now with new eyes. How many Amadas are out there right now? How many children carrying impossible burdens while we sit in air-conditioned offices debating budget allocations and diplomatic protocols? If I can't stop for one child, if I can't help one family, then what's the point of all this power? The news spread like wildfire across Burkina Faso. By nightfall, the story of Ibrahim Traoré and Amadou dominated every radio station, every television broadcast, every social media platform. The videos taken by people in the crowd went viral, showing their president carrying bricks, kneeling beside the poor, making promises not from a podium but from the dirt roads of a forgotten neighborhood. The footage was raw, unscripted, deeply human. It showed Ibrahim's face as he saw Amadou for the first time, the visible pain in his eyes. It captured the moment he knelt in the dust to speak with the child. It recorded his impassioned words to the crowd. Within hours, the videos had been viewed millions of times. The international media picked it up next. Al Jazeera ran a segment titled, "The President Who Stopped for a Child." BBC Africa reported on it with a mix of admiration and skepticism. News outlets from Paris to New York discussed this young African leader who had stopped his convoy for a child. Some praised it as authentic leadership, as the kind of human response that politics desperately needed. Others, particularly Western media outlets still clinging to colonial mindsets, dismissed it as a publicity stunt, uncomfortable with the image of an African leader who acted with such genuine compassion and who defied their low expectations of African governance. On French television, a commentator sneered, "It's good theater, but let's see if anything actually changes." African leaders are famous for emotional displays that lead nowhere. But Ibrahim didn't care about the international media commentary. His focus remained laser-sharp on what happened next within Burkina Faso itself. The wheels he had set in motion were already turning, and they would not be stopped by skepticism or criticism. Within 48 hours, Fati had been thoroughly examined by the country's best doctors at the military hospital. The diagnosis was severe tuberculosis, complicated by malnutrition and anemia. The lead physician, Dr. Kabore, reported directly to Ibrahim. "Mr. President, I must tell you honestly, this woman would have died within 2, maybe 3 weeks without intervention. Her lungs were failing. The infection had spread significantly, but we've started her on treatment, and with proper care, nutrition, and rest, she will recover fully." Ibrahim closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of those words. 2 or 3 weeks. If he had driven past that day, if he had looked away, Fati would have died in that metal shack, leaving Amadou and Aisha completely orphaned, at the mercy of a system that showed no mercy. Amadou and Aisha were given a thorough medical examination as well. Both were severely malnourished. Amadou had damaged muscles in his back and shoulders from carrying heavy loads. Aisha had intestinal parasites and was developmentally delayed due to chronic hunger. But both were resilient, and with proper nutrition and care, the doctors assured Ibrahim they would recover. The children were enrolled in one of Ouagadougou's best schools, a prestigious private institution where the children of government ministers and wealthy business people typically attended. Ibrahim personally paid their fees, bought their uniforms, their textbooks, their school supplies. When photographs emerged of Amadou in his crisp school uniform, beaming with pride as he held his first real textbooks, clutching them like treasures, the nation collectively wept with joy. The image of Amadou, the same child who had been bent under bricks just days before, now standing tall in a school uniform with a backpack and a smile that could light up the sky, became iconic. It was printed in newspapers, shared millions of times online, painted on murals in cities across Burkina Faso. It represented hope, transformation, the possibility that things could actually change. But the story didn't end there. Ibrahim's orders had set wheels in motion that couldn't be stopped. that gathered momentum with each passing day. Government. Teams fanned out across Ouagadougou and then to other cities, Bobo Dioulasso, Koudougou, Ouahigouya. They went into construction sites, mines, agricultural fields, markets, domestic households. They documented, photographed, interviewed, counted. What they found was even worse than anyone had imagined. The preliminary census revealed a staggering truth. In Burkina Faso, a nation of 22 million people, approximately 50,000 children were engaged in dangerous child labor. Some were as young as 5 years old. They worked in gold mines, inhaling toxic dust and mercury fumes. They carried impossibly heavy loads on construction sites. They worked in agricultural fields from dawn to dusk, exposed to dangerous pesticides. They served as domestic workers in wealthy households, essentially enslaved, working 16-hour days for no pay. 50,000 children. Not abstract statistics. 50,000 real children with names, with dreams, with potential being crushed under the weight of poverty and exploitation. The census reports landed on Ibrahim's desk 1 week after his encounter with Amadou, just as he had demanded. He read through them late into the night, his office lit by a single lamp. With each page, his jaw tightened further. With each documented case, each photograph of children with ancient eyes and broken bodies, his resolve hardened into something unbreakable. Major Sankara found him there at 2 a.m., still reading, his face drawn with exhaustion and emotion. "Sir, you should rest. You have meetings starting at 6 a.m. Cancel them," Ibrahim said without looking up. "Cancel everything tomorrow. I'm going on national television." "Sir?" "The people need to know. They need to see these numbers, understand the scale of this crisis, and they need to know what we're going to do about it." The next evening, Ibrahim went on national television for a special address. Every major channel broadcast it live. Radio stations carried the audio. In homes across Burkina Faso, in villages and cities, in markets and workplaces, people gathered around any available screen or speaker to listen to their president. Ibrahim sat at his desk, the census reports visible beside him. He wore his military uniform, but his expression was not that of a soldier. It was that of a father confronting an unbearable truth about his children. "My people," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "1 week ago, I met a little boy named Amadou. He was 8 years old, and he was carrying bricks that weighed almost as much as he did. Today, Amadou is in school, learning mathematics and French, and discovering that the world can be bigger than survival. His mother, Fatih, is recovering in the hospital. His sister, Aisha, is healthy and smiling for the first time in her short life." He paused, looking directly into the camera, speaking to millions of people as if addressing each one individually. "But here is the truth that keeps me awake at night. Here is the reality that we can no longer ignore or hide from. There are not just one Amadou in our nation. According to the census we just completed, there are approximately 50,000 Amadous. 50,000 children in Burkina Faso who are suffering the same way, who are sacrificing their childhoods, their health, their futures, just to help their families survive. And that is unacceptable." He let the weight of that number settle over the nation. 50,000. In living rooms across the country, parents looked at their own children. Teachers thought of their students. Grandparents remembered their grandchildren. 50,000 was not an abstract statistic. It was overwhelming and heartbreaking. "So today," Ibrahim continued, his voice taking on a tone of absolute determination, "I am announcing the National Child Protection Initiative. We are immediately implementing several measures, and I want to be clear. These are not proposals or suggestions. These are directives that will be enforced with the full power of the state." He ticked off the measures on his fingers as he spoke. "First, we are immediately banning child labor in all dangerous sectors: construction, mining, hazardous agriculture, and any work that prevents children from attending school. This ban will be enforced. Violators will face prosecution and significant fines. Second, we are creating the Family Support Fund with an initial allocation of 50 billion CFA francs. This fund will provide direct financial assistance to families who depend on their children's income so that those families can survive while their children go to school instead of work. Third, we are immediately beginning construction of 200 new schools across the nation, focusing on the poorest neighborhoods and rural areas. We are recruiting and training 5,000 new teachers. We are providing free meals to all students in these schools because a hungry child cannot learn. Fourth, we are establishing the Child Labor Enforcement Division within the Ministry of Justice. This division will investigate cases of child exploitation and hold employers accountable. If you are caught exploiting children, you will face consequences. No exceptions. Fifth, we are partnering with community organizations to identify and support vulnerable families before they reach the point of desperation where they must rely on their children to work. Ibrahim leaned forward, his intensity increasing. I know what some will say. They will say we cannot afford this. They will say it will hurt the economy. They will say we need to be realistic and practical. But let me be clear about something. If your business model requires the suffering of children, then your business does not deserve to exist in Burkina Faso. If your profit margins depend on paying 8-year-olds less than $1 to carry bricks, then you can adapt or you can leave. We will not sacrifice our children on the altar of economic convenience. The speech lasted 30 minutes. By the time it ended, the entire nation was talking about it. Social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags like "Our 5,000 children" and "No more Amaris" trended across West Africa. The response was seismic, but not uniformly positive. As Ibrahim had predicted, there was opposition, fierce, organized, and well-funded. Wealthy contractors complained loudly about losing access to cheap labor. How are we supposed to compete if we have to pay adult wages? They protested. Construction industry associations issued statements warning of economic consequences. International businesses that had been profiting from Burkina Faso's informal child labor force threatened to pull their investments. A delegation of foreign mining companies requested an urgent meeting with Ibrahim to discuss the impact of these radical changes on the business environment. Some politicians, comfortable with the old system and receiving kickbacks from industries that exploited children, grumbled that Ibrahim was being reckless, that he was hurting economic growth, that he was overreaching his authority, that he hadn't consulted properly with stakeholders. The French ambassador requested a meeting to express concerns about the new policies. When Ibrahim agreed to meet him, the conversation was tense. Mr. President, the ambassador said in his polished diplomatic French, we appreciate your passion for social issues. But France has significant investments in Burkina Faso, and we must consider the broader economic implications of these sudden policy shifts. Perhaps a more gradual approach. Ibrahim cut him off, his response sharp as a blade. Ambassador, with all due respect, Burkina Faso is a sovereign nation. We do not need France's permission to protect our children. You speak of economic implications. Let me speak of moral implications. For decades, French companies operated in Africa knowing full well that children were being exploited. They profited from it. They turned blind eyes to it. So please do not lecture me about gradual approaches and economic considerations. We are done being gradual. We are done prioritizing foreign profits over our children's lives. The ambassador's face reddened. Mr. President, this tone is undiplomatic. Then let it be undiplomatic, Ibrahim replied, standing up to signal the meeting was over. I would rather be undiplomatic and protect my people than be polite and complicit in their suffering. The meeting ended badly. The French government issued a statement expressing disappointment in Burkina Faso's confrontational approach. Some international media outlets portrayed Ibrahim as volatile and anti-business, but within Burkina Faso, his approval ratings soared. People saw a leader who stood up to foreign pressure, who prioritized children over corporate profits, who had the courage to tell powerful interests to adapt or leave. A meeting with resistant business leaders became legendary. According to multiple sources who were present, Ibrahim listened to their complaints for about 15 minutes, concerns about labor costs, competitive disadvantages, economic sustainability. Then he stood up, placed both hands flat on the conference table, and leaned forward, his eyes moving from face to face. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I have listened to your concerns. Now let me make something absolutely clear. If your business model requires the suffering of children, if your profits depend on 8-year-olds destroying their bodies for less than $1 a day, then your business doesn't deserve to exist in my country. Not now, not ever." He straightened up. "You have 2 choices. Adapt or leave. Hire adult workers. Pay fair wages. Operate ethically. Or take your businesses elsewhere. But you will not exploit children here anymore. Are we clear?" The room was silent. Some of the businessmen looked angry. Others looked chastened. One brave soul spoke up. "Mr. President, surely there can be some middle..." True leadership is not about grand strategies or brilliant policies, though those have their place. It's not about 5-year plans or international conferences or diplomatic meetings. At its core, leadership is about seeing the suffering of one person and having the courage to act. Because if you won't stop for one child, if you won't help one family, then you won't truly help 1 million. You'll just make speeches and policies that sound good but change nothing. He gestured toward Amadou, who stood nearby listening with rapt attention. Change begins with one brick lifted from one small shoulder, then another brick and another until no child has to carry what they cannot bear. That's how nations transform, one child at a time, one family at a time, one neighborhood at a time, with leaders who have the courage to stop when they see suffering instead of driving past. The story of Ibrahim Traoré and Amadou resonated far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Across West Africa and then across the entire continent, people talked about the president who had stopped his convoy for a child, who had carried bricks in the street, who had taken a poor family into his own residence, who had launched a nationwide program based on one encounter. Other African leaders began to face questions from their own citizens. Why can't you be like Ibrahim Traoré? When will you visit the poor neighborhoods? What are you doing about our children? Some leaders were defensive, calling Ibrahim's actions populist or theatrical, but others were inspired. The president of Senegal launched a similar census of child labor in his country. Ghana's government announced new funding for schools in impoverished areas. Even in nations with less progressive leadership, civil society organizations used Ibrahim's example to pressure their governments to do better. Youth movements across Africa adopted Ibrahim as a symbol of what leadership could be. Murals of him carrying bricks appeared in cities from Lagos to Nairobi to Johannesburg. A generation of young Africans saw in him proof that their continent could produce leaders who truly cared, who acted with authenticity, who prioritized people over profit. But Ibrahim remained focused on the work in Burkina Faso. There were setbacks and challenges. Not every initiative succeeded perfectly. Some families struggled even with the support provided. Some employers found ways around the new regulations. Corruption, that ancient enemy of progress, had to be constantly fought. But the overall trajectory was undeniable. 2 years after meeting Amadou, child labor in dangerous sectors had decreased by 78%. School enrollment was at an all-time high. Maternal and child health indicators had improved significantly. Foreign investors who had threatened to leave were mostly still there, having discovered that ethical labor practices didn't destroy their businesses after all. More importantly, something had shifted in the national consciousness. The people of Burkina Faso began to believe that their voices mattered, that their leaders could be held accountable, that change was possible. Town halls were packed with citizens demanding better services. Community organizations flourished. Parents became advocates for their children's education and rights. Ibrahim's approval ratings remained high, but he was under no illusion that popularity meant success. Approval ratings are just numbers, he told his advisors. What matters is whether children can be children, whether families can survive with dignity, whether we're building a nation that values human life above economic convenience. 3 years after that fateful encounter, Amadou was 11 years old and thriving. He had maintained his position as one of the top students in his class. His dream of becoming a doctor had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger and more specific. He wanted to specialize in treating diseases of poverty, tuberculosis, malaria, malnutrition. "I want to help people like my mother was," he explained in an interview for a documentary about the Child Protection Initiative. "I want to make sure nobody dies because they're too poor to see a doctor." The documentary crew had followed Amadou for months, capturing his daily life, studying late into the night by lamplight, participating enthusiastically in class discussions, playing football with friends during breaks, helping his mother with community health outreach on weekends. When the documentary aired on national television, millions watched this transformation story. Here was a child who, 3 years ago, had been carrying bricks under a merciless sun, barely surviving. Now he was articulate, educated, confident, and determined to make a difference in his nation. Fati appeared in the documentary as well, healthy and vibrant, a completely different woman from the one who had been dying in a metal shack. She spoke about her work as a community health advocate, about the hundreds of families she had helped connect with medical care, about the importance of hope. "When President Traoré came to our home that day," she said, tears in her eyes at the memory, "I thought we were being punished for something. I thought maybe we were in trouble. I never imagined that a powerful man would care about people like us. But he did. He saw us as human beings, not as problems or statistics. And because of that, my children have a future. Because of that, I have a purpose. Because of that, everything changed." Little Aisha, now 7 years old and in 2nd grade, appeared briefly in the documentary, shy and sweet, reciting a poem she had written about butterflies. The contrast between this healthy, educated, joyful child and the starving toddler she had been 3 years ago was stark and beautiful. 5 years after stopping his convoy for a child carrying bricks, Ibrahim Traoré's presidency had become defined by that single moment of humanity. Everything else he accomplished, economic reforms, anti-corruption measures, infrastructure development, diplomatic achievements, was viewed through the lens of that day. The Child Protection Initiative had evolved into a comprehensive social support system. The original 50 billion CFA franc allocation had grown to 150 billion as the program expanded and improved. Tens of thousands of children who would have been trapped in exploitative labor were now in school. Thousands of families had been lifted out of desperate poverty. But Ibrahim knew the work was far from finished. Poverty was stubborn and structural. New challenges constantly emerged. Economic pressures threatened to undermine progress. And there were still children suffering, still families in desperate need, still work to be done. On the 5th anniversary of meeting Amadou, Ibrahim delivered another national address. He was older now. Lines of responsibility etched more deeply into his face. But his eyes still held that same intensity, that same refusal to look away from suffering. "5 years ago, I met a boy named Amadou," he began. "Today, Amadou is 13 years old. He's in 8th grade. He's planning to apply to medical school in a few years. He's become a leader among his peers, tutoring younger students, organizing study groups, volunteering at the community health clinic where his mother works." Ibrahim smiled. Amadou carries things now too, but instead of bricks, he carries textbooks. Instead of breaking his body for less than $1, he's building his mind and his future. That's the difference 5 years can make when a nation decides that its children matter more than profit margins. He became more serious. "But I want to be honest with you. We have not eliminated child labor completely. We have not ended poverty. We have not solved all our problems. There are still children who need help, still families who struggle, still work to be done." He leaned forward, speaking directly to every citizen. "So here's what I need from you. I need you to be like I was 5 years ago, willing to stop when you see suffering. I need you to refuse to look away. I need you to hold your leaders accountable, including me. I need you to demand that every child in Burkina Faso has the chance to be a child. I need you to build this nation with me. One act of compassion at a time, one child helped at a time, one family supported at a time." He paused. "Because that's how real change happens. not through grand declarations or perfect policies, but through millions of small decisions, to see, to care, to act. That's how we transform a nation. That's how we build the future we want for our children. The story of Ibrahim Traoré and Amadou became more than just a story. It became a parable, a teaching tool, a source of inspiration, and a measure against which leadership was judged. Years later, when Amadou did indeed attend medical school on a full scholarship, his fees paid by a grateful nation, the news made headlines across Africa. The boy who carried bricks now studies medicine, the newspapers proclaimed. Ibrahim attended Amadou's white coat ceremony, watching with pride as the young man who had once trembled under the weight of bricks now stood tall in a physician's coat, taking an oath to heal and serve. They embraced. These two men whose lives had intersected on a dusty street under a merciless sun, whose chance encounter had rippled outward to touch thousands of lives, to change policies, to shift consciousness, to prove that one person stopping for one child can indeed change the world. "Thank you," Amadou whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for stopping." Ibrahim held the young man's shoulders, looking into his eyes. "Thank you for carrying those bricks that day. Thank you for being brave enough to accept help. Thank you for showing me and showing our nation what's possible when we refuse to accept suffering as inevitable." And so the story continues, carried forward not just by Ibrahim and Amadou, but by every person who hears it and decides to stop when they see suffering, to care when it would be easier to look away, to act when others choose comfort and indifference. The story of the president who stopped his convoy for a child carrying bricks reminds us that real power is not the ability to command armies or pass laws. Real power is the choice to see suffering and refuse to look away. Real power is love translated into action. Real power is one leader kneeling in the dust beside one child and saying, "I will not let you carry this alone." This is why the story will never be forgotten. This is why it matters. This is why it must be told and retold, passed down through generations as a reminder of what leadership can be, should be, must be. Because somewhere in the world right now, there is a child carrying a burden too heavy for their shoulders. They need someone to stop, to see them, to care. Let this story inspire you to be that person in your own life, in your own community, in your own way. Let this story remind you that you don't need to be a president to make a difference. You just need to be willing to stop when others drive past, to see when others look away, to act when others choose convenience. One child at a time, one burden lifted at a time, one act of compassion at a time. That's how we change the world. That's how Ibrahim Traoré changed Burkina Faso. And that's how you can change your corner of the world too. Author's note: this story is a fictionalized and expanded account inspired by the leadership style and values of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. While the core narrative of a leader stopping to help a child has been elaborated for educational and inspirational purposes, the underlying themes of authentic leadership, protection of children, and commitment to social justice reflect real struggles and aspirations across Africa and the developing world.